Hi there. Good morning to everybody, and thank you for kicking in here and listening to this conversation between myself, Phil Clifland. I'm here as a partner at BDO. I lead our national housing team, and Guy Flynn, who has very kindly volunteered some of his time to talk to me about the outcome and findings of our Social Housing Barometer this year. So, Guy, would you like to say a bit more about yourself and your role, and then we'll go straight into it?
Yes. Good morning, Phil. Good to see you again. So, in short, I'm here because of Phil Clifland's. Actually, Phil got me into social housing. Maybe it was 11 or 12 years ago. I think it was, Phil. In a different life. So I'm now the financial reporting director at Hyde Group. It's a new role that Hyde recruited to last year. To effectively improve and enhance our corporate reporting. So, as we'll probably come through the conversation today, Phil, that's the passion of mine and where a lot of my views from the barometer, which is very interesting. The overall read was good, where I'll try and put the slant on from a corporate reporting perspective.
Great. And Guy, as I said, I'm really grateful for you sharing your time this morning, and also I know you were one of the people who definitely responded to our kind of survey for the barometer too, so always grateful for people to find their time in that way, because the more people who respond, I guess the richer the content and outcome is for us, and the greater conversation piece it has with our client base and hopefully future client base too. So I guess my first question really is, standing back as having read the barometer as its entirety, what was the thing that stood out for you the most, I guess, at a high level, and then we'll drill down into some of the findings.
Yeah, well, at a high level, I think the results weren't too surprising in the sense that a lot of the key issues and risks that I think all housing associations are dealing with, and particularly us at Hyde, there's nothing that wasn't on our list. So I'm pleased in that respect that I think we're all talking about the same issues. In the detail, which we'll come to, there's a lot of areas that I think from a corporate reporting perspective that there is important considerations for us to think about. But I think the most surprising one actually, and it might be because there's lots of other issues that are arising this year, is the cost efficiencies that they have gone down. Because I think the impact on our customers, particularly around heating, energy costs going up, obviously the ongoing impacts of the pandemic and all the other rising costs, that controlling our costs as a sector, I think is very important, especially on the value for money agenda. So seeing that dip down might be because the capacity of how many risks you can talk about, but that's probably the main one that we absolutely continually need to focus on efficiencies, and still delivering more. So that's probably the main omission that I thought. But I think there's a lot of areas from a corporate reporting perspective that I passionately have some good views on. So I'm sure we'll get into some of those shortly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I totally agree, and I think I do think it's a sense of what the barometer brings out each year, and definitely did this year, is the number of different plates that housing associations are spinning, and the number of risks that they face, and indeed the opportunities that they have. And so I guess when people are responding and ranking things of importance, things shift, and maybe we'll come on to one in a short while around sort of the availability of skills and resources has really shot up this year as an area of focus. And I guess therefore, by definition, some of the things go down the list, and efficiency appears to be one of those. Although I would totally agree. I know most of my clients remain very focused on efficiency and very focused on value for money, because it's kind of a difficult thing not to be focused on in the current environment, and particularly when you factor in things like inflation and those sort of things that are going to hit business plans in the future. So yeah, I was slightly surprised too, but maybe there are a lot of other things going on.
Yeah, it's actually a really good point. I think the burnout in the teams, and as you say, around access to skills, there's a lot of projects ongoing across the piece, I think, for all organisations. So knowing what to focus on and prioritising is an ongoing challenge, I think, for all of us.
I agree. So maybe should we pick up on the skills and resources piece first then, because I guess our sense has been definitely over the last year or two, there's been this sort of growing awareness that access to skills and resources is getting harder. And I do think actually that most people's thought processes about that is around kind of the front office in terms of skilled workers to support the asset management programs and development programs. But I know that you've got a particular focus as well on highlighting it's not just front office, it's also a kind of wider access to skills and resources.
No, absolutely, and definitely not to detract from what we do with our customers on the front line. But I think from my perspective in my role, it's very much the back office skills that need to keep pace. So, we're continuing to get more complex as a sector, and as a large developing RP, which many are, with that comes more complexity in how we report and information that we get. So be that, I don't want to say systems are the backbone of everything. You've got people, processes, and systems, but I think they are very all intertwined when it comes to getting reliable management information. And as part of that means we need to be procuring things differently. It might mean we need more sophisticated systems, processes, and people, and that also comes at a cost. I think for me, the main driver for some of this is a lot of the corporate reporting reforms that we are seeing. And as a social housing sector, I'm not sure we're always front of mind of the regulators and government in terms of the implications of those. But I'm alluding here to the infamous UK SOX regime that may be impacting us as a sector, particularly those that have listed debt. And I think the impact on skills and resources and access to finite resources to operate in such a regime should not be underestimated, and that goes right through the organisation. And I think that for me is where I'm most focused, to make sure that us as Hyde, but also us as a sector, appreciate and understand what the impact will be, and therefore ensure that we get access to those finite resources, because we are seen as a listed entity, and that means that we have a much higher bar that we're having to report under.
Which, I mean, I guess you're probably singing to the converted here in terms of my particular role in life, but and I would wholly agree with you. I guess what does that actually meant for Hyde, and I guess what does that mean for the sector more widely, about the type of skills or the type of resources you think are needed to kind of, I guess, meet that strengthening challenge for the financial reporting regulator and others?
Yeah, I think for us, I guess I'm talking myself into a job here a little bit as well, but recruiting into Hyde into a new role to bring some different experiences to the core team has been great, but it's actually complementing the knowledge that's already within our organisation. So one thing that surprised me is that there's nothing missing. It's a lot of it is the joining up and bringing the glue together around people knowing their roles and their jobs and how we need to report, but there just isn't the capacity in existing teams to be able to do that. And I think as a sector, therefore, ensuring that we are focused on corporate reporting as a fundamental part of the organisation, because ultimately that's where people go to on our website when they're looking to understand this. They will go to our financial statements, they'll read our annual report, hopefully get past page 30 and look at the balance sheet and the I&E as well. And that's what our investors look at. So if I expand it out to some of the other areas that we'll come on to, but when people look into invest in our organisation and our sector, that means a lot of different things. That's our lenders, it's the regulator, it's partners that we might go into joint ventures with, or go into other sort of partnership arrangements that Hyde is very much at the forefront of doing at the moment. We need to have very robust and well-controlled financial reporting processes to get our messages across. And I think having reporting as something that is continuous and I guess goes hand in hand with management reporting in terms of financial reporting and management reporting, that's really what we're driving at Hyde. And I think as a sector, I hope that we all continue to thrive for that. Again, I'm not trying to preach the financial statements is the most exciting part, but they should not be a one-off thing at the end of the year, when that is the end product that we ultimately produce for our third parties and investors and partners to get their insight into our organisation.
I mean, and again, clearly, I'm full agreement here. And I think just standing back and thinking about the sector often looks at within and I guess benchmarks against itself in terms of what good looks like in terms of reporting and those sort of things. Have you got a view about actually maybe the impact of things like UK SOX and will change that in terms of where we should look for good sort of outcomes and good reporting?
Yeah, no, it's I appreciate you raising that one, Phil, because it is a bugbear of mine, that there are right times when we say how are we doing compared to the sector, in the social housing sector. But when it comes to corporate reporting, I absolutely think that we should not be doing that. We are seen by our stakeholders as a listed entity and listed group, and there are many of those across the social housing sector. So we should be looking at the FTSE. If we look at the size of our balance sheets, we are absolutely in the FTSE 100.
Yeah.
We don't have equity shareholders, of course, but we do have bond investors, we do have the partners, etc., that I spoke about earlier. And so we should be looking at our peers from that listed sector, because that's where the regulators are looking at us from. I know from an auditor's perspective as well, that is how the profession regulator looks at the firms as well. So we shouldn't be looking at ourselves, because I think, well, then there's the risk of becoming complacent, I think, in that if no one is improving, then we don't need to improve. But really looking forward to the FTSE, I think, is where we need to align with our financial reporting.
Yeah, okay, totally understood. Okay, so if we change tack a little bit and think about maybe some of the other things that came out of the barometer and some of the things, I mean, clearly, perhaps unsurprisingly, there's a sense of a slight weakening in economic confidence, for example. Well, that's clearly no surprise given we're still, well, hopefully coming out of a pandemic, but nevertheless still in it, and that's definitely had an impact. And I mentioned inflation at the beginning of this conversation too, and you can see there are pressures. There's also, I guess, the ongoing pressure of the impact on landlord health and safety costs in terms of the ongoing response to fire and post-Grenfell and elsewhere. So, because one of the areas that then looked at is, well, what does that mean for development? And actually you can see a number of organisations saying, well, our development might have to slow down in the short term at least. But equally, all of that can have some financial consequences, I guess. And thinking about your role and the things that you think about, those sort of macro environmental pieces, how do they impact on your thought processes around financial reporting and the numbers and all those sort of things?
Yeah, it's very closely linked and follows on from actually what I was talking about earlier with our partners. So, it's no secret at Hyde, I'm sure everyone's read our annual report, that additionality and working with third-party investors is very much where we're innovating and forging those relationships to continue to have additionality for the sector. And that may mean that we look to develop new housing in partnership with third-party investors. So not necessarily therefore all of the risk being with us solely, but sharing that risk with others who understand and appreciate the long-term benefits of social housing as a product for their financial benefits. And we are treading very carefully to make sure that we're balancing what that means for our customers, making sure that from a regulatory perspective, we're doing the right thing, which obviously goes without saying. But I think the key for me from a financial reporting perspective is we need to therefore tell our story in a very smart, forward-looking, and professional way. And we've always done that. But as I say, that our stakeholders who read our accounts is broadening, and so that's where telling that story is very important. I think in the detail and where I think both of our passions are filling from an accounting perspective, there's lots of implications of that. So, are we therefore changing how we're treating certain sites? Are we changing tenures? Do we need to reappraise? There's all the accounting implications that come on the back of that around, for example, are there triggers of impairment? Are there not? What sort of properties are we holding now? Is it still PPE? Are we looking to have an investment portfolio or not?
Yeah.
At essence, are we still doing social housing? And I think that means for me that we need to therefore just make sure that we're not making judgments around what we're doing with our portfolio too early, because that then becomes complicated. And I'm sure that from your perspective, you'll see the other side of it, that we end up changing the tenures and the accounting gets quite complicated. I think we need to be taking a little bit of a step back to say, in essence, what are we doing? Are we still producing social housing products? Well, that's where we need to potentially look at, how we're classifying our sites and what the board are therefore seeing we're doing with the sites. That then allows us to tell that story in a much simpler way, rather than things coming in and out of different classifications, because it becomes complicated and, again, harder to tell the story and what we're actually fundamentally doing when we report that through in our balance sheet and through to our stakeholders.
And how easily? So I, again, clearly completely agree with that, and I think how do you? I guess you've got board priorities and sort of board view of risk, and then clearly big picture stuff, and then at the other end of it is the sort of the nitty gritty conversation about how does that manifest itself in the financial statements? How do you get a sensible linkage between those two things? Because and how do you, I guess, get people to understand that there could be a linkage between those two things?
Yeah, it's a good question. I haven't got the silver bullet of answers that makes it all easy. It's not always. It is complicated, and the devil is in the detail. But I think fundamentally, it's coming back to what are we doing as an organisation? Are we providing more social housing as a product from the sites that we have? And if we are, as a not-for-profit registered provider, we need to start with that business premise on what the outcome should be, and not trying to have the accounting complicate ultimately what the board are looking to approve. Because then when we report back in our management accounts, different types of products in different ways, and they end up in different parts of the balance sheet and the I&E, the board then can't make sensible decisions on the information because there isn't that linkage. So I think starting with what's the business trying to achieve, or what are they achieving, and having that thread then come down into, and therefore this is how the accounting should follow. If we try to be too detailed in the accounting and we miss that linkage to what the board are trying to do with our sites, that's where we're not reporting in a very coherent way, and it's confusing. And if it's confusing for us, then it's definitely confusing for the board, and therefore it's definitely confusing for readers. So,
well, that was going to be my point. It then becomes, how does that connect to, you made the point about broadening of stakeholders and more people interested in, I guess, Hyde's accounts, but definitely the sector's accounts too, as a vehicle of, I guess, change and meeting that affordable homes demand that we have. Then that understandability is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. However, of course, I would say this as well, not therefore having that mean that we don't consider the complex accounting, because the devil is in the detail. But I think it's very easy to get confused in the, in data of, thousands and thousands of data sets, and seeing how that manifests itself in the financial statements. I think it's much easier to start with a narrative on what are we trying to achieve, why are we doing something. That should always be at the heart of then how that goes into the reporting, not the other way around, because it's hard to make sense of it sometimes, especially when decisions are changing and they're quite fluid in this environment.
Cool. So again, totally agree. I guess just then perhaps developing that and changing tack slightly. The core, each year the barometer focuses on a particular sort of topic area, and perhaps unsurprisingly, last year was the topic was how's the sector rebounded or responded to COVID. This year we took the decision to focus on ESG in its widest context, but also in terms of reporting, because clearly you can sense how the prominence of that has grown all of the time within this sector, but also much more widely too. And we were interested to see how organisations in this sector were thinking about ESG, how they were measuring ESG, how they were reporting on ESG too. And again, that clearly then links back into stakeholders and users and those sort of things. So I guess the interesting thing for me was there was quite a mixed picture, I think, in terms of the maturity of response at this stage, in terms of how organisations are approaching it. And interested in your thoughts, and then perhaps how Hyde have been approaching that whole area.
Yeah, it's an ever-changing area, isn't it? I think you open up my emails and see what's come from the FRC, and another change has happened either internationally or in the UK around what will or won't be required, what's coming down the pipeline. So I think it's something that is here, and we are needing to think about, and we are absolutely thinking about that in our financial plans. So I think first and foremost, it's about being up to date on what some of those issues are, on how we need carbon reporting, ESG, etc., and also having a narrative with our stakeholders. So again, coming back to the variety of stakeholders we have, be that green bonds, or be that wanting to know how they will be working with the organisation that has ESG, carbon, etc., at the top of their agenda, we need to keep that narrative running through. I think we are seeing, as Hyde in the sector, a lot of investment in, hitting our carbon targets in the future. I won't quote whatever the dates are because they might change, as they always do, with government policies, etc. But we are having to think and plan for those now, and we are investing, a lot in making sure our homes are more energy efficient, getting to the right banding, etc. I think in terms of specifics for us at Hyde in our reporting, your listeners may be aware that we launched the value of a social tenancy a number of years ago, and continue to measure that, which for us is how we are able to articulate, an evidence-based measure, the real value of having people in a Hyde home. So I won't try and wax lyrical the outcomes of the reports, but they're on our website, which people can read. But it really does show the wider benefits in thinking about, the communities that our customers live in, how it's impacting health, policing, providing jobs, understanding the additional impacts, additionality impacts in a positive way is really important for us. Carbon, the environment is an element of that, but there are lots of other social benefits that also come from that. So I think, the value of the social tenancy is something that we're very proud of, and we'll probably, we will continue to obviously report against that, but we also need to obviously then think what are the required changes coming down the line. Yeah,
it's interesting because you would think, this whole area of ESG should really play to the sector's strengths. It should really, there's a story to tell, and I think a very powerful story to tell around the social impact that housing associations do have, can have, and indeed should have. And I guess my sense from the respondents to the survey is that some people have really understood that, and some people are still working through their understanding of that, if that makes sense. And I know that Hyde spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I guess you would probably encourage others to do the same.
Yeah, I could not agree more with you, Phil. We're social housing providers, so social being the operative word, ESG having the word social in it, really is at the heart of what we do. And telling that story, if I can try and link it all back to the accounts, is absolutely important, because everything that we do is positive, in the sense that we are doing great things for our communities. And so making sure we link that in with then our reporting, telling that story to our stakeholders, then allows them to see, our stakeholders that is, why it's a very, very safe and, morally, ethically right investment to make in the sector. That story has to be told. And, if we're going to continue to build the homes that we need, we're going to have to do that regardless of what the regulations say. So, couldn't agree more. And it's great to see the move sort of being enforced upon us as well, because then we can, put more rigor around it as a sector. Yeah.
No, and I guess interesting. So I know that one of your other hats that you wear is the newly appointed chair of the SALT Working Party for the sector. And I know one of the things we talked through at the last meeting was the impact of some of the ESG piece around on the accounting world. And clearly your day job at Hyde is really thinking that through too. So I guess maybe, can you give us a flavour of the sort of things, therefore, you're having to think about as a consequence of there's a massive ESG agenda, but when you bring it back to your role in financial reporting, what are the things that are at the forefront of your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. It does in part, I think, link to things such as, the building safety agenda as well, and really is, what is the cost of building a home to the right specification, be that environmental or otherwise, that we're now doing, and that's going up. It has to go up, which is good because it's providing more energy efficient, safer homes. So fundamentally, what is a capital cost? And it's a really simple thing for me to say, but actually is complicated when we look at, are we building new homes? A bit easier to think about because the initial costs are incurring, but retrofitting that's when it becomes a little bit more complicated. Yeah. And so thinking around, how long do our assets last? Do we need to replace them sooner, parts of our assets sooner than we anticipated? A great judgment we all have in our accounts is our useful economic lives, and we are required to reassess them every year. I'm sure that we all do that every year. But the carbon agenda and the ESG, not ESG, sorry, the energy efficiency reporting requirements and what we're doing to our homes is forcing us to reassess that. Will we keep those boilers for as long as we thought we would? Are we going to make any major investment into retrofitting, and is that capital in nature? I'd love to give the answer. Jury's out just yet, but that is absolutely what we're focused on understanding, because not only for current year's financial statements and next year's, but our financial plans, as I said earlier, we're all investing significant sums, millions and millions of pounds across the sector. We therefore need to understand, that's going to mean more capital costs. Are there any impairment risks? Some of our properties that might not be meeting across the sector the expectations we need, and how long will they last? The high depreciation potentially, all those sorts of implications come into it. So I'm excited, if I can get away with saying so, that the accounting is quite interesting, but links very closely to something that is impacting every organisation across the globe. So yeah, an exciting time in the accounting world, which I'm sure you're.
It's always good for the financial reporting and accountants to get excited, isn't it? Has to be said. So
absolutely.
So that, Guy, I think that's probably they're the key areas I think that I certainly wanted to cover in this conversation. Really helpful to get that kind of that slightly different view of we talked to the barometer, a number of people in it. It could be the chair of a board or it could be the chief executive, and they clearly come at it from one perspective. It's been really interesting to see your perspective on it in terms of, I guess, what some of the things housing associations are grappling with means for the way you report things and the judgments you're having to make and the way you tell your story. So really appreciate you spending that time articulating it, and clearly I look forward to seeing and hearing more about what Hyde's doing in due course.
Phil, I'll always take the opportunity to wave the flag for accountants. We're a passionate bunch, so we always at the forefront of what's impacting organisations. So it's been great to speak with you again, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, Guy.
Cheers, mate.